Just a couple weeks ago, College Board released 270 brand new questions. In this video, I'm going to solve what I consider to be the 5 hardest questions from that new batch. And we're just going to go ahead and start with, I think, the most evil question of the bunch, which is this. What are we looking at here? All right, so for all of these, I encourage you to pause the video and try them on your own first. You're going to get way more out of this if you actually attempt these and get some practice in. But I'm going to go ahead and get into the explanation here. So one of the things that makes this hard is usually with these types of graph command of evidence based questions, we can ignore the graphic, start with supporting some sort of a statement or hypothesis or something, and then just eliminate answer choices. This is one of the rare hard questions where we are literally interpreting the graph, and you can tell that because it's just kind of explaining what's going on, and then it says the researchers concluded. So we have to also conclude. We have to pretend that we're the researchers, and we have to conclude instead. So that's how we're going to approach this. In order to come up with a conclusion, we need to know what the heck we're looking at, because I have no idea what I'm seeing here. Like, what is this? Sir, 87, 86, sir? What? Okay, so let's figure it out, man. We know that we're going to have to pinpoint the meaning of this ratio and what it has to do with age. And looking at the answer choices, we can also see that there's going to be something about MFS versus PFBV. So these are the keywords that I'm really looking to identify as I read through this. And I am going to more or less read through this. Just keep in mind that I'm really slowing down for anything that has to do with these and these. So first thing I'm noticing is a mention of Ma, which is here, right? And it says that HH3 is tied to 6 million years ago. So I'd probably write a note here. I'd probably say HH3, 6 million. So basically this is outside of the graphic, all right? And then it says HH4, 6 million to 4.75 million. So I'm making a mental note that this is sort of our cutoff. And the graph, H4, I'm just going to put graph ages. Now it's telling me that the MFS is this fossil site and that PFBV is a bone region. And it says right here, it says, while fossils have indicated that they date to the HH4. So basically it's saying, while we have evidence that they date to this range that we see, and usually when I see while, I get excited because there's probably going to be a contrast. The contrast is precise age has provided challenging. So I'm already thinking that maybe my answer is going to have to do with the precise age. This might even be something I would highlight if I were highlighting. And then basically they compared the ratios. Okay, finally we're learning what the ratios. So they compared the ratios, and that's what we're looking at. It's giving us the actual decimal points for MFS and PFBV. So basically, MFS is going to be the first one here, and PFBV is going to be the second one here. And then this other sentence just seems to be telling me that these ratios do indeed line up with like ages. So basically, if we have one of these numbers, like, well, we can actually see this one in the graphic, right? This one right here, we know lines up with 5.86 million years ago. So we already know that PFBV is 5.8 mil, and that does fall within the range. And then the other one, 709,028, that would actually fall in between these two. So it's basically going to be somewhere between 5.4 and 4.75 million years ago. So I'll just say, oops, I'm already screwing up. I mislabeled that. First one's supposed to be MFS. Okay, so but yeah, basically PFBV is going to be somewhere in between. I'm just going to say 5-ish. Cool. All right. And they both land within the range. Okay, so again, normally we would not be trying to figure out what's going on with the graphic, but that's literally what they're asking us to do for this one, which is, again, rare. So one of the things that makes this hard. Let's go ahead and eliminate based off of all of this stuff. So A says, this evidence offers less dating precision. Right off the bat, there's no indication that this would be less precise. So I'm already skeptical of that one. And then it also says that PFBV was likely closer to the H3, H4 boundary. But remember, PFBV is around the 5, and the the H3 is actually way up here. So that's verifiably false. A is out. B is saying that these ratios only partially support the site age estimates from before. I mean, the other estimates were basically just saying that they both fall within the H4, which we know is true. So I don't think it's only partially. I think if anything, we have more information. C, the average ratios resolve previous uncertainty about the relative ages by indicating that both sites were deposited contemporaneously during the late HH. Well, that's tough because now we have a vocab word in the middle of our command of evidence. Just think of contemporaries, the people who are like hanging out and being cool around the same time as you. That means at the same time. We know it's not the same time. We know that this is 5.8 and this is 5-ish. So that is also untrue. Hopefully D's right. D says the ratios show that they both fall within H4. We talked about that. But PFVB was likely deposited more recently. 5-ish would be more recently because we're talking about million years ago. So the lower million years ago means the more recent. Choice D is absolutely our answer. And yeah, that was a nightmare of a question. Hope you followed along. If you did not follow along, go ahead and put some sort of a screaming emoji into the comment section for me. And if this happens to be the very first time you're learning from this bald bearded man, my name is Robert and I'm the founder of Penguin Test Prep. All of these videos are free on YouTube, but if you're looking for extra support, we do offer everything from self-paced study to group tutoring, all the way up to one-on-one tutoring. So if you're interested in any of that, check out the links in the description. Next up, we've got this terrible inference question. And to be clear, all inference questions are terrible. But this was one of the harder ones that I found in the new batch. So with inference questions, we're always going to do a 3-note system. So if you want to try this out, pause the video, take a main idea note halfway through the passage, another main idea note when you get to the period right before the last sentence, and then a prediction note. But let's talk about it. A lot of the time, the first sentence of an inference question is just giving you some background information. So my note doesn't usually include that. Basically, it's just introducing this hypothesis. I am seeing several numbers though. So I'll say, I'd probably like highlight this as my starting point for this hypothesis for iron. Metallurgy, I don't know what that is, some sort of iron work. The first note for me really comes more around this period. And what I'm getting here is the hypothesis is NA, North Africa, 800 BCE. And in my head, I'm thinking this is when the iron thing arrived. And then before spreading below, basically, because it says from there, it went down to sub-Saharan Africa. All right, then we get however, which is a huge indicator that something important is about to happen. And we are certainly going to take a note. Whenever I have a however, I usually start my note with a big but, like a capital B-U-T. My second note, you're going to see here, but Central Africa, as early as 2300. And you might be wondering, why didn't I mention this? I don't care about this number because this number would fall in line with it spreading after 800. So it could have spread 100 years later. But the 2300 is incredibly early. In fact, it's earlier than the 2200. So that's probably the big but that however is referring to. And then my final note will be a prediction. Based on this, my prediction is going to be is that they made their own ironwork thing. And I'm being very vague because I don't know what this thing is, but I'm referring to the iron metallurgy, right? That's what it is. It says the craft. That's why I'm saying like some sort of ironwork. And if there's evidence of this stuff earlier than the beginning of the West Asia situation, it sounds like they might have had their own version of this happening in Central Africa before it had a chance to spread. So that's my prediction. All right, choice A may have developed independently and relatively simultaneously in Anatolia. I would just check. Yeah, Anatolia is the West Asia and parts of Central Africa. That's a pretty good match, but I'm not going to choose it. We always want to eliminate, not choose. You might choose a distractor answer otherwise. B, technologies found in Gabari, likely derived directly from technologies transmitted from Anatolia, but those found in these other places did not. I'll hold on to that one. Actually, it doesn't match my prediction. It doesn't match my prediction because it's saying that Some of them were transmitted from Anatolia. Gabarbi, I would just want to check about the Gabarbi. Well, it does say the Gabarbi was the later one. But again, yeah, you want to pretend like your prediction is the answer, because if you have good predictions, it usually is. So, but we'll get rid of it because it doesn't match my prediction. It also doesn't really say anything about what happened with these other sites. Like if it didn't come from Asia, from Anatolia, then where did it come from? Whereas A addresses that. C, likely transmitted to Central Africa via an alternative route than the one suggested. That also doesn't match my hypothesis, and it doesn't really even account for that crazy date in any way. And then choice D, may have originated in Anatolia much earlier than the available evidence currently indicates. So that one seems kind of tempting because it is like speaking to that number, but it assumes a lot. It's assuming that if it originated in Anatolia, that it would also spread later. And there's just a lot that you have to kind of assume there. And then again, the main thing I'm looking for is, does it match my prediction? Choice A is the only one that actually matches my prediction. So that is my answer. All right, next up, we've got a main idea question. Interestingly, this question stem is just saying which choice best describes what happens in the text. This is new. Normally it would ask the main idea or it would ask about some specific detail, but this is kind of asking for a summary. So we need to read through and understand what's going on from start to finish. Now, importantly, because the language is translated from a 1597 play, our best bet at understanding the starting context is by actually reading this little intro here. So let's make sure not to ignore that. And again, if you want to pause the video and try this on your own first, go ahead. But basically, we know that this is Richard reflecting on the arrest of his brother, and his brother's name is Clarence. And whenever you're reading poetry or old plays, it's important to translate what's going on because you're probably not going to understand straight up. So I do the wrong and first begin to brawl, the secret mischiefs that I set flowing. What in the world is going on here? And I'm going to assume that you guys aren't having a wonderful time translating this, so I'm not going to beat around the bush and lie to you about things that I do and do not understand. I want you to see that it's possible to get these even if you don't know what's going on. At least not entirely. So I do the wrong. So did something wrong. And first begin to brawl. I mean, brawl is like fight. So I don't know what's going on there. Began to fight. I'm going to put a question mark because contextually I'm confused. Like why would he begin to fight? The secret mischiefs that I set. And he already talked about doing something wrong. I lay unto the grievous charge of others. Okay, so the secret mischiefs that I set, so the sneaky thing that I did, I lay into the grievous charge of others. So I'm going to say I blame my sneaky on someone else. That's all I'm getting from the first three lines there. Moving on. Clarence, so we know that this is the brother. Clarence, whom I indeed have casted in darkness, I do beweep to many simple, gullible people. So if he cast Clarence into darkness, I'm going to say did something wrong to Clarence, and I do beweep. I think that just means I do cry, because weep is cry, right? To many simple, gullible people. So it sounds like he's crying in front of gullible people, so maybe he's not really sad. Namely, to these people. Okay, so it does mention those people are like nobles. So I'm assuming these are the gullible people. And tell them 'tis the queen and her allies that stir the king against the duke, my brother. Ah, okay. Blame it on the queen. And then the thing that's wrong is, like, we know that he recently got arrested, so I'm assuming he got his brother arrested. All right. Now they believe it, and withal wet me to be revenged on rivers Dorset gray. I don't know. They believe. Okay. So this is what I got, and we're just going to go through and we're going to eliminate based on, the order of events here that we have decided upon. All right. So A describes having wept as he informed these guys that the queen and her allies convinced the king to act against Clarence, and says that the earnestness of his grief caused them to accept his version of events. Okay, so this one is what I would call a distorted distractor answer because the first half lines up with everything we wrote, right? But the earnestness of his grief, hopefully you know that word earnestness, it means like authenticity. We know that he's pretending to cry because he called them gullible people. So because of that, A is out. be on the lookout. Half of the answer is correct. There's some part of it that's incorrect. That is a distractor answer, something you should be looking to eliminate. B, Richard says Clarence's troubles are because of his plotting and the distrust of Clarence that the queen and her allies have planted in the king's mind. That one also seems to be distorted because he has his own secret plotting, but it seems like he's saying it's all his fault. He's blaming it on the queen, but we don't get that the queen actually has anything to do with it. It seems like he's just pretending or telling people that that's the case. So B would be out. C indicates that he pretended to be aggrieved, sad about Clarence's situation. Yes. And proclaimed it to be the fault of the queen and her allies. Yes. But in reality, he has caused the hostility. Yeah. That all seems to line up. I'm going to keep C. D acknowledges that his mischievous nature has spurred him to commit misdeeds in the past, including instigating enmity between the king and Clarence, but he reports that he has hitherto not lost the trust of the queen and her allies. That one just doesn't seem to have anything to do with what I wrote, so no. So I think pretty easily, choice C there, and just keep in mind whenever you're writing notes, like we have been for some of these, my private tutoring students are always apprehensive to write notes because they think it's going to take longer. But what happens if you don't write notes is you end up bouncing back and forth between the answers and the text, trying to figure out what's going on because you didn't know what was going on from the start. So even though it seems like it takes longer, I promise you it's going to save you time. And more importantly, when you do decide on the answer, it's going to be the correct answer. So it's a good choice. Don't be afraid of writing notes. Now, I'm assuming if you're watching this video that you're not getting a perfect score in the English section. And regardless of what level you're at, I've got a free English crash course that will help to boost your score quickly. So go ahead and check out the link in the description for that. All right, so next up we have this cross-text connections question. And with traditional cross-text connections, I like to start with the responder. And I say traditional because most of them are this sort of response-based question. And since text 2 is the responder, I'm actually going to start by getting text 2's position. I'm going to write a note about text 2's position, and then I'm going to use that position to respond to text 1. So text 2, I'm basically seeing that Haitian candidates, high temp plus evaporation. And then the other part seems to be that the HZ inner edge is going to be 3.85. And to be clear, I don't know what the Haitian candidates are yet. I don't know what the HZ is. I don't know what the 3.5 is. I'm assuming it's some sort of a distance, but we're going to find out as we read text 1 and respond. All right, so in text 1, I'm sort of clarifying here in my head that these Haitian planets are basically liquid water planets that support life, potentially. And now we know that HZ is the habitable zone. So, and more clearly, habitable for liquid water, and then I guess also in turn life. Now, text 1 is saying that this begins around 1 AU, which it looks like is indeed going to be a distance. So that's the main difference that I'm noting. And then it's talking about this same planet as the other one, and it's identifying it as a candidate, saying that it's right on the inner edge of HZ. So if it's right on the inner edge, I think the biggest thing text 2 would point out is, no, that's actually way too close. And then since we're talking about the habitable zone, if we're way too close, we would say no life and no water. Now, let's eliminate. Choice A, the chemical composition suggests this planet's surface is unlikely to harbor liquid water. That is one of the things I said. I wasn't really focused on chemical composition as much, but I'll keep it for now. Choice B, they relied on models that are likely too high. Models who estimate the surface temperature are likely too high. This seems like completely out of scope. I don't remember them mentioning how they studied stuff, so that would be a distractor for sure. Unlike this candidate, other types are likely located within the habitable zone. Most other types. That seems like a really weird blanket statement, and again, it doesn't match my prediction. When in doubt, just look at your prediction, and if it doesn't match at all, then it's wrong. D, by arguing that this and other candidates are unlikely to support life because they're located too far from the stars they orbit. Ah, okay. So there's another distorted answer. The first part was sounding kind of good because unlikely to support life, although the other candidates part I'm not too sure about. But the big issue is it says they're located too far from the stars, when in fact we know it's way too close. So D is out, and my answer is going to be choice A. All right, for our last question, we've got another command of evidence. This one is textual, unlike the first one, which was quantitative. And this one has a very interesting question stem. Normally, we're asking to support or weaken some sort of a claim or hypothesis, but this is saying, what would account for the discrepancy that this person observed? And a discrepancy is basically some sort of an unexpected finding or something that is controversial or doesn't follow the rules or something. Do pause the video and try this one on your own first if you're trying to get some extra practice in. But let's talk. So the discrepancy is basically the very last sentence. It says she found that Asian countries showed evidence of herding, but African countries did not. I know this because we have a finding, and then the sentence before it says she posited. So posited means, she claimed or suspected that herding would manifest in regional peer countries converging on the same foreign currency accumulation rate. It's a lot of words, but we're going to put it into our own words. Regardless of each country's observable circumstances. So basically, she thought that, I'll put this in my own words, thought all countries would herd, but, big capital but there for the discrepancy, Africa did not. Cool, so that's the discrepancy. Now, to be clear, I don't know what herding means. And in the answer choices, I am not seeing the word herding, which means I'm going to need to identify it. Normally, I would start eliminating, but if I know that the herding term is something that is important for my answer, I need to know what it means if it's not actually showing up in the text. So I need to be able to substitute it with its definition, potentially. So at this point, I would cherry pick the passage, and boom, right here, it's telling me the definition of herding. So, in which individuals converge on the same action by imitating economic decisions of one or more peers. So basically it means copying. I'll just kind of define this. Herding, copying financial choices. And then the specifics of what this person posited or guessed is that they would copy accumulation rate. So I'm going to go ahead and specify that as well. Just in parentheses, we're looking for accumulation rate. Now, let's eliminate. Choice A, the majority of currency held in African countries was foreign, whereas majority in Asian was domestic. That doesn't really say anything about accumulation rate. It also doesn't seem like it would stop African countries from doing the copying, because it does say regardless of each observable circumstance. So we're going to need to find something that would actually prevent them from copying their neighbors. So choice A is out. Choice B, most of the African countries belong to international economic unions that set individual policies for accumulation, whereas Asian countries were largely free to set their own policies. Okay, so this one is mentioning accumulation, which I would say is one of the ingredients that we need for our correct answer. See my ingredients video if you want to know more about that. And also, if herding is copying your neighbors, but in Africa, they have policies that they have to follow, that would actually prevent them from copying their neighbors. So I'm going to keep B. Choice C says there was a financial crisis that messed with African reserves, whereas it didn't mess with Asia as much. Again, we're not even mentioning accumulation rate, and I still don't see how this would stop them from copying their neighbors, so C is out. D, the African countries tended to accumulate, okay, so we do have accumulation, a variety of foreign currencies, whereas the Asian countries tended to favor a single foreign currency. Okay, so this one mentions accumulation, but it seems completely out of scope because, again, It's not giving me anything that would stop the African countries from copying their neighbors. So that is out, and just like that, choice B is going to be our answer. Now, obviously, my approach was a little bit different for each one of those questions, but if you're looking for a strong strategy for SAT reading questions in general, this video is what you want to watch next.